right, let's bring in Israeli journalist Amit Segel. He is the chief political commentator of Channel 12 and the author of the newsletter It's Noon in Israel, and he's joining us now live from Jerusalem. Amit, it's good to have you back on the program. So let's pick up there with the reporting now. Multiple news outlets citing what is described as a tense conversation between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. Axios saying one source claimed the Prime Minister's, quote, hair was on fire. We know Trump, at least publicly, is continuing to push for a diplomatic path, perhaps expanding the ceasefire even further, and declaring yesterday publicly that Prime Minister Netanyahu will do whatever he wants him to do. This is an election season for the Prime Minister. Just give us what you're hearing from sources. How deep of a divide is there now between these two leaders? How is Prime Minister Netanyahu reacting to this public posture, at least from President Trump?
So I think there are two contradicting point of views here. One is that the attack is imminent, that the IDF and the US Air Force are crossing the T's and dotting the I's of yet another round of fighting, this time more dramatic than the last two. Every single passenger who went through Ben-Gvir airport or other airports in Israel could have seen dozens of tankers, of American tankers preparing for attack. And the other point of view is exactly the opposite, that Netanyahu and Trump burned the midnight oil having a tense conversation, and this midnight oil burned Netanyahu's hair. And I think, to be honest, that it is all of the above. It's quite clear that President Trump doesn't believe or doesn't want another round of fighting. It's rather clear that Prime Minister Netanyahu is quite skeptical about the prospects of negotiations to actually reach something which is more than symbolic. And yet, I think that at the end of the day, the chances for an agreement between the US and the fundamentalist regime of Iran are quite low. I don't think that the maximum that they are willing to give meets the minimum that President Trump is willing to take.
I mean, if there is a long-term peace deal between the US and Iran, without regime change, without an uprising from the Iranian people, without the full destruction of Iran's nuclear capabilities, knowing that Iran can and likely will rebuild their missile capabilities in just a few months, as we've seen reporting, would this war have been a waste for Israel?
I think so, yes. I do not see it happening, but yes, I think there are two goals that if even one is achieved, this war has already been a success. One is the enriched uranium, the sword on the Israeli neck, and in my opinion, the Middle Eastern and the world neck, but it's something else, the world throat. And the regime itself. Now, if an agreement is achieved, not only we push the pause button, we push the rewind button, because all the sanctions are to be eased. The frozen Iranian money is to be handed directly to the IRGC. And that's why I think Israel would prefer to see the number one scenario is not to see any agreement and to keep it exactly as it is going now, siege on the Strait of Hormuz and very severe sanctions. However, since no one is quite sure that the political atmosphere in the United States would allow it to happen, so the ball is in the United States court.
Yeah, and we'll have to see what ends up with the Strait of Hormuz, because from the Iranians' perspective, the ball is in their court in terms of who has control over it right now, and that is something President Trump and the rest of the world says cannot be the case going forward. It is true. I was just in Israel last week. I saw dozens of those U.S. tankers. There was speculation as to whether the war was imminent to resume, and we're still in wait-and-see mode. I do want to turn to a new controversy involving far-right Israeli Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. A video of him taunting detained activists who were part of a flotilla trying to deliver aid to Gaza is sparking a global outcry. Israel's prime minister, foreign minister, issuing a rare public rebuke against their own cabinet member. You wrote about this in your newsletter today, calling Ben-Gvir a reputational arsonist, writing that Ben-Gvir's photo op achieved absolutely nothing, yet the diplomatic bill is staggering. So that just leads to the question, because this isn't the first infraction that we've seen from Ben-Gvir. At this point, given the reputational damage to the country at a very, very sensitive time for Prime Minister Netanyahu as it relates to this war and his relationship with the United States, why doesn't he just fire him?
Let's call a spade a spade. Ben-Gvir is in the business of provocations. He got not only the gift of the gab, but the gift of the TikTok, and this is the only thing that matters to him. He doesn't really care about Israeli policy, and all he cares about is the upcoming election and having more likes on his Facebook and Twitter accounts. However, because of the highly divided Israeli political atmosphere, for Netanyahu to fire Ben-Gvir is like for President Trump to give up the votes, the electoral votes of Florida and Arizona altogether. Ben-Gvir gives him the majority. Now, Israel is heading to the polls, and if following post-October 7th, the right and the left in Israel would agree that unity is more important than getting an outright majority at the expense of your political opponent, I think it's going to pave the way for a better government. Because I think Ben-Gvir carries a heavy damage for Israel's reputation, and I think it's a huge problem now. While it's quite clear, I guess, that I'm not going to be a member of his fan club, we still have to remember that those activists were partly former ISIS activists, that they wanted to break the international law and the local law, that it's not the first time they want to help Hamas, that they are funded by NGOs affiliated with Hamas. And having all that said, I'm not sure that a follower from the Netherlands or Belgium or the United States fully understand this, because when you see a minister surrounded by police officers humiliating detainees, you might feel that they are the miserable. And I think it was a prize to terrorism and anti-Israeli sentiment.
Well, whatever those activists, whatever their intentions were, whatever groups they may or may not have been affiliated with, it wasn't just any minister. It was the national security minister, and those were his police officers that were surrounding him, which is one reason why we've seen so much condemnation around the world. Amit Segel, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.